Every team, every topic, everywhere. This is Believe.
Hey y'all, it's Amber. Have you been absolutely loving the Amber Ben saga? Maybe on TikTok or maybe on the Sci-Fi podcast. If so, join our Patreon for as little as $4 a month. We got something coming up on June 30th. We're doing a book raffle for the award-winning book New Sons. So join our Patreon and then get a personal message from us if you win that book. We also do Patreon shout-outs here on the show and on our Instagram page at the Sci-Fi podcast. And I want to welcome 2 new patrons to the squad. Welcome Quaylen and Jordan freaking Wilson. I know you, you know me. Thank you for joining our Patreon. Good to see you, man. So if you want to get a little bit more contact, join our Patreon and win that book, baby. Now let's get started with the show. Welcome to the Sci-Fi a part of the Believe Podcast Network about Black science fiction, fantasy, and staying on the same page in our marriage. Today is episode 38, and we're going to be discussing the major differences between the Amazon Prime TV series, The Underground Railroad, directed by Barry Jenkins, and the book written by Colson Whitehead. Just to give you a heads up, there will be spoilers for the TV show and the book if you have not seen that. And Ben, how we doing? I got to ask you how we doing today first.
We're not only discussing differences, but we're also discussing similarities. So compare and contrast.
I said that, no?
No, you just said differences.
Why you always coming? Why you always coming for my throat? You come. I'm choking because you're stepping on my throat constantly.
I'm not stepping on your throat. That sounds very violent.
So what you been up to, baby?
You know, you had a meltdown recently because clutter.
I have a meltdown every other day.
Gets into your space. Anyway, I've been thinking a lot about space and the importance of organization in the midst of chaos. And let's just jump into like a big difference from this book, because this is something that you experienced recently. When your area is not sort of organized, you sort of lose yourself a little bit. And we need order in the midst of chaos. And it just makes me think of that whole scene in the book where Cora is focused on maintaining that little plot of land that belonged to her grandmother, Ajari, and that was passed on to Mabel and then passed on to Cora. And even in the midst of this chaos, like, it's so important to create order, and it keeps your sanity. And right now you have sort of lost a little bit of your sanity because I'm a disorganized person and you need order.
Yes, you are listening to a woman on the edge. Our house is so cluttered. It's just me and Ben. And Ben, you like to hold on to every little thing. And I like to just say, do we need this? Do we use this? When's the last time we wore this? Does this even fit anymore? Get it the fuck out of here if it doesn't. Whereas you're like, no, this is sentimental. Let's organize it. It's like, but when are you actually going to do that? Also, listeners, how much do you love that I asked Ben about how he's doing, how his day was going, and he answers with me having a meltdown? Y'all caught that, right? Exactly. Don't look at me like that. Do you know what does, Ben? Do you know what does help me get off of the edge a little bit, to just get out of my head and into just a better space? Everybody's Apple Podcast ratings. So we are so grateful for all of the Apple Podcast ratings that we have received. And I found a couple that I would just like to read right now because I'm feeling a little stressed, but y'all make me feel better. So here's a couple. We got Danny from NJ. I promise I'm going to read these exactly as I see them. Danny from NJ writes, love this. Amber and Ben need a TV show. I will listen to them talk about anything. I came because of the TikToks. I'm staying because of the podcast. Thank you, Danny from NJ. And then we got Emma Winsky, who writes, what a fun listen. I have to admit, I found this podcast when it was mentioned on Amber's Instagram, which I found during an Instagram reel binge. I was so delighted at not only the playful bantering, but amazing insight. I'm a big sci-fi nerd, but I really enjoy how they approach the different subjects. I hope they keep up this fantastic work. Ooh, and we will, Emma Winsky, we will. And the last one I'm going to read right here. Autumn 11E writes, my favorite couple. I'm a union carpenter. I listen to so many podcasts at work, cleaning, driving, etc. I love you too. Amber, please scream that. Between TikTok and here, I love all of it. However, I sometimes can't hear you. Your audio is low. I'm not taking a star away. I know y'all want a low star rating for street credit. Not here, not. But maybe you can look into that. thanks. Be great, y'all. We love it. Thank you for that, Autumn. We have been working on this audio, so I'm going to turn this sound up. And Autumn, I want to hear from you and everybody else. Okay, we really finna start the show for real. All right, Ben, so we both just finished the book, The Underground Railroad. Obviously, we watched the TV series together. What stood out to you right away as some things that you maybe like loved about the book or saw as major differences?
Well, overall, I loved the TV show more than the book.
Shut up.
Yeah, it reminded me of the first season of Game of Thrones, where the first book of Game of Thrones is almost beat for beat from the first season. And yeah, the TV show was better. The book felt like a first draft, and then the TV show felt like a really great edit of parts of the book that needed to be edited, and then added parts that need to be added were added.
What are some parts in the TV show that really stood out to you that you loved and you were sort of disappointed in the book?
Yeah, the whole through line with Grace was not inside the book at all. That sort of disappointed me. I guess the whole part with, which we'll get into, I guess, Ridgway's father, where Ridgway's father was sort of a jerk in the book as well, where in the TV show he is a spiritual, kind, caring person, and in the book he's not like that at all. I mean, he references the Great Spirit a little bit, but at the same time he, refers to Black people with the N-word in the book, where in the TV show he's very clearly an abolitionist, Ridgway's father.
I want to talk a little bit about that for a second, because I see how the TV series got there, right? In the book, Martin's dad was a heavy abolitionist. So if we remember, Martin is who we met in North Carolina, and Cora and Grace were stored in his attic. So we learn in that story that Martin's dad is like this huge abolitionist, like not like what Martin's doing, like let's hide these people in this attic and forget about them. Like this guy's making the pamphlets, risking his life, helping to save like hundreds of thousands of Black people escape slavery. And so then Martin is saving like one or two, hoping his dad is going to be one day proud of him. It sounds like they tried to capture the essence of Martin's dad and put that in Ridgway's dad. Do you see that kind of happening?
Yeah, they did that with a couple characters. For example, on Valentine's farm, there's this sort of philosopher Lander, and Lander is the one who has this big debate with Mingo at the end, where in the TV show, they combine Valentine and Lander. And that's like one of the big things of short story writing, or writing in general, is if you're telling a story and you have too many characters, just combine aspects of those characters. You took that short story class, remember? Or the storytelling class?
I did take a storytelling.
And remember that was one of the advice that they gave you.
Yeah, I like that. I just sometimes I'm like, oh, it kind of would have made sense if it was over here instead. Or it was interesting reading the book.
Sorry, what do you mean by over here?
I'm saying if it was Martin's dad instead of Ridgway's dad that they did it with. But I realized why they did that, because Ridgway just needed a little bit more depth. But it's disappointing to hear that like you were really supportive of Ridgway's dad, and he mostly was only disappointed in Ridgway because he's like, I wanted you to be a blacksmith. I don't care about these Negroes. I just wanted you to work for the family business, and now you don't. But he didn't really care so much about the humanity of Black people. It was more of like a you chose the wrong livelihood thing.
Yeah. Also, we mentioned this in the last episode, but they explicitly mentioned that Ridgway's father makes chains in the book for slaves. And in the first review of part 1 of our Underground Railroad, I mentioned that the item that ironically young Ridgway fucks up making in the TV show are chains, are these links. And so I thought that was really interesting that the book explicitly references this entire economic system in which the blacksmith made chains for the slavers. I thought that was super, super bizarre.
Yeah, whereas we were doing that mental hurdle on our own with the TV show. I want to talk a little bit more about Ridgway's story, right? Like, let's just stay there for a second, because the book also didn't have Mac in it. So in the TV series, there was this little kid that Ridgway lured into a well, He was like, the great spirit's down there. You should go get it. He lures this little kid into the well. Obviously, this kid like breaks his foot or something and has a limp for the rest of his life. And then that character, Mac, is grown up. We see in the TV series. And there's this whole like scuffle and debacle with how Cora is rescued from Ridgeway. That looked completely different in the book, obviously, because Mac's character did not exist. Why do you think Barry Jenkins chose to include or make up this Mac character? Maybe it wasn't him, but the writers.
I think it was to make Ridgeway a more complicated character. I mean, in the book, Ridgeway is just an asshole, awful human, where in the TV show, he was way more complicated, way more nuanced, and way more terrifying. Like, when someone becomes evil despite having a powerful, like, upbringing in the sense, or an ethical upbringing, and even being surrounded by other black people, like that made Ridgeway in the TV show that more terrifying. Both of us have siblings though, and at this farm in the TV show where Ridgeway leads Mac down and sort of commits this massive act of cruelty, and in the book there's just lots of random acts of cruelty. It made me think like of some times where I've had like random acts of cruelty done to my sisters. I have 3 sisters, or they've done to me. Have you ever done like a random act of cruelty for...
Why don't you admit what yours is first, and then I can be like, oh, I can see myself doing something like that.
Well, my sister was on the swing once, and she was just sitting, and she was eating crackers, and I remember just walking up to her and flipping the swing, and she fell, and she dropped all her crackers onto the dirt, and she like skinned her knee, and I felt so guilty. Like for some reason...
Why did you do that?
I don't know. I think there's... It was almost like sociopathic. I don't know why. I felt so guilty afterwards. Maybe I thought it was like a joke. I don't know.
So you're saying you're sympathizing, not sympathizing, but relating and resonating with Ridgeway's actions because you're like, we were all raised by the same parents. I don't know why I decided to go this way with my thoughts and feelings. Because you went that, like, you have veered, like, cruelty aside, you've also veered in different ways religiously, and those have worked out for you or helped you or, allowed you've furthered your education, and or sometimes it's good to get out of those small cities. So, but maybe you're just looking at it as just the cruelty part.
Well, or the fact that humans have this propensity. I mean, first of all, reading the Underground Railroad is way more brutal. I felt like the brutality was way more intense than the TV show. Or there's this cavalierness in which Colson Whitehead writes these horrific events. Where the TV show took entire episodes to build up or to sort of reflect on a very heinous, violent act. In the book, it's given a paragraph, and then we move on. Did you feel that at all? No?
I do not, but I really, 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 like, stylistically enjoy what he does and how he builds and how he... I wouldn't say he trivializes those things, but he sort of desensitizes you to them in a way, because it's like, this is what happens. This is how things go. But when he uplifts me and inspires me, it's so, so, so good. Like, I really enjoyed the parts. I'm curious to go back and see, like, there are these little excerpts that start each chapter that have like fugitives, wanted, whatever, and he writes so well that I'm wondering, like, oh, are these real? Are they? Yeah.
You always gotta read the acknowledgments, Amber. All right, so in the acknowledgments, he says the runaway slave advertisements are real. They're from the digital collections at the University of North Carolina.
Okay, so because he is not world building, but sort of like setting the background for us for this book, if you're including things like that in the book, you have to sort of match that energy with your style of writing, right? So you can't have like slave, girl, high yellow skin, on the run, whatever. Like that's how those things were described. So I think he matched that tone with what he did. And I think that those really grounded him. Like, those were some of the parts of the book where I was just like, I really enjoyed these parts. P. Jelly Clark's Ring Shout did that as well. Like, those slave notations. They really set the scene. Like when I was reading this book, I truly felt like I was taken to a different time period. When I was looking at TV series, like still so good, but it was a little bit more easy for me to just like turn it off and keep going. Whereas when I'm reading real slave, fugitive, like wanted dead or alive signs, I'm really grounded in it. You didn't feel that? Or the book just still felt like blah to you?
It did not feel blah to me. I would not describe it that way. I would say that you're almost describing like a journalistic approach, or almost it feels like a journalistic approach where Barry Jenkins created this like musing piece of art. And sort of in preparation for this podcast, I watched Moonlight, and it felt very reflective of what he was doing in Moonlight, like that broodingness, the reflection, the long shots, where the book seems to sort of hit you and then move on, like hit you and then move on. And there are elements of that in the TV show. For example, when Royal gets killed in the TV show, it's very similar to how he gets killed in the book. He's killed, and then Cora is immediately, taken away from Ridgeway. So there are elements of that. It just seemed that the journalistic approach of, A, B, C, D, it was not sort of what Barry Jenkins did in the TV show.
Barry Jenkins likes to take his time and pace things out and build. I definitely agree with that, because I'm currently right now, I loved the Underground Railroad so much that I bought and picked up one of Colson Whitehead's other books, The Nickel Boys, and it does the same thing. Like something insane will happen and it'll be like chapter 3. I'm like, wait, we're not going to talk about this person that just like literally just died in the most brutal way. Like we're just going to move on to the next thing. So I see what you're saying with that, Joy. I think I liked the book more.
Yeah, what made you like the book more then? I'm just curious.
Just how we get to know these characters. Like, I really enjoyed in the book, just to, get us on a little bit of a trail here. I really enjoyed, so in North Carolina, Martin and his wife, Ethel, right? The book had a whole backstory on Ethel that I really appreciated, and every character, whether we hated them or we loved them, has a huge backstory and a little bit more light shed on them. And so in the book, Ethel, who is this like very religious, obviously she's scared to hold these slave women in her home. But so let me break down why I really, really enjoyed the Ethel narrative, right? So in the book, Cora is in Ethel's attic. We learn about how Ethel as a child was like super religious and had this Black childhood friend named Jasmine, right? And so Jasmine was obviously like the house girl that her family owned and whatever, but Ethel used to play with this little girl when they were kids. And then as they both slowly get a little bit older, we learn that Ethel's dad rapes her friend Jasmine. And Ethel's dad is like walking upstairs, because in this way, in Ethel's childhood home, Jasmine also lives upstairs. Maybe not in an attic hiding, of course, but like her quarters are upstairs. And so Ethel talks vividly about seeing her father go upstairs and not really knowing what he's doing, but knowing that my dad going up the stairs is a bad thing. And it's causing turmoil in my parents' relationship, right? And so what we have years later is Ethel's husband going up these stairs for a reason that stirs Ethel as well, for a different reason, right? So Ethel has this whole sort of trauma and narrative around going up the stairs, either for rape or for housing or for showing slaves attention that's being taken away from her. I know I'm like misconstruing all this, but those like poignant moments were something that the show and the TV series did not have time for, that I really, really appreciated in the book. So every character, like if you saw the TV show, Ridgeway got a whole backstory, but in this book, everybody got that. Like I love that the book jumped in right with Cora's grandmother, Ajari. Like that's a great place to start. Versus, just Cora. So it all matters. And I just don't think that would have translated well in a TV show. But I like starting with someone's grandparent. If somebody gave the story of your life, where would you want them to start? in a book versus a movie. You know what I'm saying?
Oh, I'd have to think a while for that. I mean, maybe at the start of the universe. Personally, like
Okay,
that
let's
would be
talk about-
that would be
wow,
really
you-
fascinating.
Yeah.
Like to see all the atoms that eventually came together to make me up, and to see their nexus from like billions of years ago. And
If
see,
somebody was doing a movie on your life,
yeah, I think that would be so fascinating to start a movie like that. Okay, but I want to come back to Ethel, because the parts that stuck out to you about Ethel were not the parts that stuck out to me. What stuck out to me about Ethel was this almost like how would you this insane desire to proselytize and to convert Africans, and specifically wanting to go to the dark of Africa, that
And save.
it constantly referred to, and save them.
like the globe's most, crazy, deranged beast. Like that's her mission or whatever.
I went back and listened to our previous episodes on this, and I think at one point I called Ethel an abolitionist, and she is very clearly not an abolitionist.
I remember I'm so glad you said that, because I remember saying she not no abolitionist.
Yeah, she says that if God wanted black people to be free, God wouldn't have had them be in chains or whatever. And there's lines in this. So Ethel is I don't know, it's like there's this religious ecstasy type of mental illness where some people have this, I think it's a mental illness where people are like religiously obsessed with like converting others or pleasing God. I forgot the name of it. I'll have to look that up later, but Augustine went through it. But it's this anxiety, this divine anxiety almost to see if you're pleasing God or not. And Ethel has that scene, which is not really, it's shown a little bit in the TV show when she's praying over Cora, when Cora gets sick, but it's very clearly portrayed in the book. Yeah, that's right. That's a powerful difference. Ajari and Ethel's backstory.
Ben knows this, but I love watching shit about like cults and extreme beliefs. Like that is my shit, from Scientology to like, what is it? The Buddha fields, Family of God, all of that. I'm so fascinated by this, and I'm sure you're just like, why is she watching this again? But one time on the Cults and Extreme Beliefs, there was this lady from, what is it? The Federalist Latter-day Saints. It's like the fundamentalist, something like that. The very, very, very strict Mormons, I want to say. And this woman came forward and was having a discourse with somebody who had left that group, and she wouldn't even look at him. And he was like, hey, like, I still have so much love for these people that raised me. I just had to get out of some of these, like, very, very extreme practices and behaviors. And at that point, their leader had been, like, in prison for all these child brides. It was, a chaos. And the woman, like, the moderator was like, how do you respond to all of this stuff? And she was like, I can't respond to all of this stuff because I need my religion. Like there's next to nothing you can tell me about the damage that's done, because I need this way more than it needs me. And how that need, like, she's literally saying to them, like, I know that this happened. I don't care that this happened, because if I lose this religion, I lose everything. So I need to be here. And so sometimes it's kind of just like people saying, like, I have to stay here because I have no identity outside of this, And I feel like that's big Ethel energy as well.
And I mean, on that note, let's go take a religious break. I'm going to go pray.
Hey friend, what you doing? Cleaning up, working out, or just plain old living your best life? Whatever you do, you better do it in some leggings and something comfortable. I get my leggings from Roam Loud. Roam Loud is a black-owned business by a black girl boss who celebrates navigating the world boldly. And now you can get leggings for 15% off using the promo code HOTMESS15. So do your yoga, do your shopping, do your Trader Joe's, and don't forget to use that code. Check out roamloud.com. Now let's get back to the show.
And we are back. I loved this book by Robert Louis Stevenson growing up. It was called The Body Snatchers. And the whole book was about people going up and digging up bodies and like selling them to doctors. And sort of like, it is a creepy, terrifying book. And it's a short story. And there is an entire short story very similar to that. Robert Louis Stevenson's, I think it's called The Body Snatchers, inside here. And we don't get that in the TV show. So in the TV show, we do have this sort of sympathetic doctor, Dr. Stevens, who is very kind to Cora. And we learn more about Cora's past when she goes and visits him, when she is inside when she's in North Carolina, sort of in the earlier of the TV show. And in the story, we get Dr. Stevenson's background, which goes into your whole point. Like, the book gives more background. But you really liked that. I had actually forgotten about that scene, and until you brought it up. You're like, wait, you didn't like the whole gravedigger narrative, and how there's a line in there where it says that only in death Black people became humans, because it was just so common to go up and dig up Black graves, because they knew the Black folk would not go knock on the sheriff's door, and they would sell them to the grave diggers would take these Black bodies and sell them to doctors to study.
I think that line, it's on page 147, by the way. In death, the Negro became human, is this idea that the Black body is more valuable in death, because you're like, now I can study you for scientific purposes and things like that. Sorry, page 142. In death, the Negro became human. Only then was he the white man's equal. Because, once we strip away everything anatomically, we're all the same. And that, I mean, what a chilling line. It's really sad to think about that. I'm more valuable dead than alive. Like, he said it perfectly. I don't need to add anything to that. But the whole idea of, like, literally unearthing dead bodies for scientific medical purposes, I'm sure that's like a rampant problem, is just, ugh.
Yeah, there's this whole idea of, maybe we call it like what's the term? Like when the great contradiction. Like, okay. America has this great contradiction, which is founded on the idea of, 3/5 make a Black person. A Black person is 3/5, when they were sort of developing our current political system of voting. Like, how many votes should you have inside the electoral house? So they would use the 3/5 of a Black person to determine how many electoral votes, even though Black people weren't allowed to vote. Anyway, the whole electoral college, super racist. And that idea, while at the same time, like, going and digging up bodies, or the idea even that Terrence Randall, we find out later at the book, he dies, and he dies in New Orleans in a Creole house. Like, do you remember that? Yeah. So Terrence Randall dies because he frequents a Creole house for like sexual, sexual pleasure.
So he goes to a house. Okay, I guess.
Yeah, a Creole brothel, and that whole idea is part of this great contradiction. And this book sort of pulls that out in a very clear way. And the fantastical elements aren't really as prevalent inside the book.
No, not at all. That's a really great point to make. I'll say lastly about the value of the Black body. I've always just been so, I don't know. I try to separate myself from it, but it's like, no, I'm a part of this as well. But it's so bizarre to me that, I mean, that shit starts at like babies and orphanages. Like, Black kids literally cost less than white kids, and they'll try to be like, well, more Black babies are abandoned than white babies. That's so we have more Black babies, which could be true or whatever, but it's really like, I read this full Atlantic article once about how Black babies are like 50% the cost of white babies, because there's this sort of like, not trend, but you do see a lot of white families who adopt Black babies or Asian babies or whatever, and sometimes you just are like, well, that's interesting that it's not weird or anything, but you're just kind of like, you inquire a little bit. And so I remember one time like sitting and reading this Atlantic article, I was like, oh, Black babies literally cost less or are easier to get. And then you get to things like from auction blocks trading slaves to like even how these NBA players are like traded back and forth to teams for like exorbitant amounts of money. You're just kind of like the monetization of Black people's bodies and it's always exclusively bodies. It's just so prevalent in our society. Like it's not minds, or brain power, or any of that. It's like, I want to study your muscles. I want to study your body. I want to do this syphilis experiment on you. Like that, I just don't see an end in sight for that.
For me, this is this whole idea of like America having this tradition. For example, it started with Black people, but we do it with immigrant labor, right? Like we continue to do this in different ways.
But that all stemmed from like slave labor.
Yeah, exactly. It's just we find the next thing, right? Or the next person or the next group of people to capitalize on their labor. Like that's an American tradition.
Can I ask you something? How do you feel about connecting text to world? So, obviously growing up, my parents had the three of us and my brother. And sometimes a neighbor, and I don't think it was racially charged at all, but sometimes a neighbor would say, it's just Georgia. They'd be like, oh, does your boy cut grass or something like that? Like, you can come over here and cut my grass for $15 or whatever. And obviously Aaron would be like, fuck, now you just like signed me up to go, like you literally just outsourced my labor to a neighbor who I don't talk to, who I don't fuck with, who, back in the day probably wouldn't even paid Aaron the money to do it. They would have just paid the parents. Like, how do you feel about that?
Yeah, I think, that's, neighborhood kids washing cars for cheaper, or like schools putting on like,
did that.
Yeah. Schools putting on car washes and like well, again, it comes down to capitalizing on labor cheaply, right? It used to be capitalized on labor for free, which is slavery. And now whether it's, then we went through a whole stage. America went through a whole stage where, well, slavery's, illegal. So what do? So we capitalize on child labor, right? And child labor became a thing.
Like sharecropping.
Or the waistcoat factory fire. Remember that forcing women to work long hours, and they ended up just all burning in the really famous coat. Do you remember this?
Yeah.
Then we developed unions, and now with unions, we sort of allowed the workers to get equitable age, but now there's all this pushback to stop unions from growing. And again, it's this whole cycle, this American battle that tugs back and forth of labor and getting labor cheaply or freely, whether it's from a child, whether it's from the whole idea. I don't know if it was racially charged. I mean, maybe, but I think it stems from this idea of like, we want labor cheaply and we don't want to pay someone professionally to come and cut it because we don't believe people should be paid equitably. That's sort of the idea.
So we have a kid one day and they want to get a job when they're 15. What's the dialogue there?
I mean, the dialogue is no job. Like you're
not gonna let our kid get a job if they want one. Because I literally got my first job at age 15. Because I wanted my own money.
No.
Okay, let's have a serious conversation about this. So why would you not? If our child wants to go work somewhere, why would you not let them do it?
Because you need to be working on developing your skills. Like when you're 15 years old, you should, in my opinion, right? When you're working, you're stealing labor from a full-grown person. Like you don't need that money to survive. Us, me having as a teacher, you as an actor, you don't need that job. So when kids,
but what if they want their independence? What if they're just going to be like a little Amber?
So no, absolutely.
What if they want coworkers and friends?
No, you sign up for a summer camp. You sign up for skateboard camp. You sign up. I'd let them play football before I let them get a job. Because I think when you let a kid get a job so young, you put this idea that cheap labor is okay. Like, I'm going to work $15 an hour. No, absolutely not. You should not be working $15 an hour. You should be working for, $25 an hour, right? Like, there's enough money in our economy to provide jobs like that, but we're not willing. And I think it stems back to slavery. We had some friends come over and we're like, shit, just everything stems back to slavery over and over again. I do want to, before we wrap this up, there's one line that's sort of repeated, and it's said in the beginning of the TV show, and it's also said in the beginning of the book, where basically it says, if you get on the train and look out the train, you'll see what this country is really about. Mm-hmm. And I didn't really understand that line until I read the book, because at the end of the book, Cora has this reflection. And throughout the entire book, you get Cora's inner monologue, and she's a philosopher. Cora is a philosopher of this book, and I love her internal monologue that you sort of miss when you are watching the TV show. Mm-hmm. But at one point, remember, she says, when you look out
the window, you can
out
see
the window,
America for what it is, essentially.
And basically, it's just darkness. She's like, because you're riding an underground railroad, and ultimately, the underground railroad leads to nowhere. And the book becomes, and I think I had mentioned that in our last episode, but the book explicitly lays that out. The book is a great accompaniment to the TV show, and it brought out things from the TV show that I missed, and it was...
They work well together, but they sort of exist as two separate entities.
Yeah.
For me.
Yeah.
Let's get really quickly into some size, because I got one. I know you got one as well, but my biggest sigh, OMG, if you're still out there listening, so in the book, Jasper was the slave that Cora met when she was in Tennessee, who sang hymns to himself, and Cora sort of described it first as being funny in the head. He's literally just shot in the face in the book, which I hated, because in the TV series, he had such a powerful storyline about how he sort of took control of his own destiny and starved himself. Like, we literally devoted time last week to talking about ethical suicides and stuff. And so to see that, like, none of that happened in the book was like, damn, Colson Whitehead. Or maybe, I don't know, I want to believe Colson Whitehead said, like, I didn't do this one character right in the book. Can we put this in the story, in the TV series instead? Because it was so beautifully crafted. I was like, there's no way he didn't have a hand in the fall of this character. But I was really disappointed in the book, because I was like, I'm waiting for this very poetic, very well-written storyline about Jasper, and that to no end.
Yeah, and then...
To no avail, rather.
Right, and in that whole scene, Bozeman is the one who's shot and killed, because Bozeman is sort of egging young Ridgway on, and Ridgway shoots him in the face.
Well, Bozeman was shot in the TV series as well.
Right, in the TV series, Ridgway kills him, but in the book, it's Royal and the people who rescue Cora, they kill Bozeman. Where I thought it was just way more compelling to have Bozeman shot and killed by Ridgway.
I agree.
I mean, I have to say, like, old Ridgway in the TV show was one of my favorite characters.
Old Ridgway?
Yeah, as far as, like, tertiary characters, I loved Cora. She was my favorite. In the book, she is even more, like, beautiful and powerful and resilient. Beautiful, powerful, and resilient. In the book, and
like,
where there's really not, like, any tertiary character in the book is not really elaborated on to an extent that I felt like very much attached with, where in the TV show there was a lot of tertiary characters I felt deeply connected with, like, for example, Caesar, incredible. And there's this and in the book, my big sigh in the book is that Cora doesn't shoot and kill Ridgway. He just falls and, like, slowly bleeds out, where in the TV show she shoots him. In the book, though, she does kick him 3 times in the face when she's first captured, and in the TV show she shoots him 3 times in the chest. 1 for Lovey, 1 for Jasper, 1 for Caesar. But in the book, she says she kicks him in the face 3 times, 1 for Lovey, 1 for Caesar, 1 for Jasper.
And she also said she wanted to believe it was for those 3, but ultimately it was just 3 for herself.
Yeah, ultimately it was for herself. Yeah, that was great. I would say that's the big Cy, I have not having old Ridgway there and not having Cora shoot and kill young Ridgway.
Love it. And Ben, with that being said, why don't you warp up the show?
In conclusion, read The Underground Railroad. It really is a nice way to bookend this series that we had on the Underground Railroad. They complement each other so well. I think the TV show shows more about the book, and the book shows more about the TV show. Honestly, like a beautiful cycle, and it is your duty as an American, I think, to watch the TV show and read the book.
Thanks, Ben. Thank you so much for listening to another episode of the Sci-Fi Sci. We about to watch movies for the rest of the month, y'all. Get ready to laugh, because we're going to be watching Meet the Blacks and Meet the Blacks 2, the American comedy horror film directed by Deon Taylor. Now, Meet the Blacks 2 comes out on June 11th, but we want to be ready for that premiere. Mike Epps, Cat Williams, I cannot wait. So be sure to watch Meet the Blacks. Meet the Blacks 2 drops June 11th, and we will see you next week for the show. Bye, y'all.
Thank you for listening to Believe. You can show support to your host by subscribing to the show and giving us a 5-star rating on your preferred platform. Check us out at Believe.com and search for BLEAV on YouTube.
What is up, Astros fans? This is Jeff Balke and my partner, former Astro Jeff Blum from the Believe in Astros podcast to tell you baseball is back, and we've got your world champion Houston Astros covered.
Every week we go inside the clubhouse, break down the games, discuss the players, and give you everything you need to know about the Houston Astros baseball organization, with special guests and a few surprises all summer and into the postseason.
So tune in to the Believe in Astros podcast. That's BLEAV on Apple, Spotify, YouTube, and everywhere you get your podcasts. Go Astros.